Hello, and welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Gennari. Today, we are speaking with Georgia Supreme Court Justice Shawn LaGrua. Thank you so much for joining us, Shawn.
Happy to be here, Angela.
So Shawn has joined us today through a recommendation from a great friend of ours, and I'm just so thrilled that she's taking the time to be here because I know it's not easy to get on your schedule. So I want to make an introduction for Justice LaGrua because she's super impressive. Shawn LaGrua has been a justice on the Supreme Court of Georgia since January 7th, 2021. Prior to her appointment, Justice LaGrua served as a Superior Court Justice in the Atlanta Judicial Circuit. She served as Inspector General for the Georgia Secretary of State, has over 20 years of trial experience serving as Chief Senior Assistant District Attorney in DeKalb and Fulton counties, and Chief Assistant District Attorney in the Tallapoosa Circuit. Additionally, she has served as the Solicitor General for DeKalb County. While on the bench in Fulton County, Justice LaGrua initiated and presided over My Journey Matters, a pilot accountability program designed to divert young offenders from a lifetime of incarceration. In 2016, Justice LaGrua received the St. Thomas More Award from the St. Thomas More Society in recognition of specific actions manifesting a commitment to justice and humanity, especially in difficult circumstances, related in part to her formation of and continued commitment to the My Journey Matters program. She currently serves as the chair of the Chief Justice's COVID-19 Task Force, co-chair of the Judicial Council Standing Committee on Technology, liaison to the Judicial Workload Assessment Committee, advisor to the Ad Hoc Committee on Judicial Emergency Preparedness Council, member of the Judicial Nominating Committee, and member of the Child Support Commission. Justice LaGrua was recently inducted into the Georgia State University College of Law Order of the Baristas. She is also a master of the Logan E. Beckley Inn of Court and Lamar Inn of Court. She is a founding member and past chair of the Georgia Association of Women Lawyers Judicial Application Review Committee. She is also the past president of the Council of Superior Court Judges. After graduating from the University of Georgia, go Dogs, Justice LaGrua received her Juris Doctorate from the Georgia State University College of Law. She is married to husband Chris and has 2 stepsons and 2 Bernese Mountain Dogs who are rescues. Wow, that is a mouthful. That is so incredibly impressive. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I don't know how you have the time.
I'm happy to do it.
So I want to just start off by asking, was going into law always your path? Did you always know that you wanted to be an attorney and then eventually a Supreme Court justice?
I always knew I wanted to be an attorney, probably from the age of 4. My dad was a career JAG, which is the Judge Advocate General part of the Army. So he was an Army lawyer my whole life. So I grew up knowing I wanted to be a lawyer from when I was a little kid. Didn't ever think about being a judge of any sort until I went to the Secretary of State's office and was doing sort of admin law more than other things, a little bit of voting law and some other things, but was not in the courtroom. I had been a trial attorney for almost 20 years and I missed the courtroom. And that's what led me back to the courtroom, but never thought about it before that. I loved my job too much.
Really? Wow, that's amazing. And so you are, obviously making incredible moves through the justice system and all of the different positions that you've served on. But you started My Journey Matters. So with everything else, what led you to start My Journey Matters? And tell me a little bit about that program.
You have to go back a few years. When I started as a prosecutor and I came straight out of law school and became an assistant DA in DeKalb County, the average age of the violent offender, and by violent, I mean armed robberies, serious aggravated assaults, nighttime residential burglaries, the average age of those offenders was probably 20, 21 years old, dropping out of high school in the 11th grade.
Wow.
Fast forward to when I took the bench in Fulton County, and the Superior Court bench has the most serious felonies in the state. The average age of the violent offender, and this is mostly anecdotal, but I was there for 11 years, was between 15 and 17 or 18, dropping out of school in the 9th grade.
Wow.
So if you were to leave here tonight because you stay late to edit and do whatever you're going to do and it's dark, and somebody comes by with a gun, hits you in the head, steals your purse, knocks you down, armed robbery, and they catch him. He's 17 years old. Can I tell you he shouldn't go to jail, or I shouldn't say jail, prison for 10 years? No. And in Georgia, the minimum mandatory sentence for armed robbery is 10 years, minimum, to the door. And judges have no discretion over that sentencing. So if somebody pleads guilty or is convicted of armed robbery, is 10 years to the door prison sentence.
Wow.
Appropriate for what I just described happening to you tonight or any other night. But I started thinking about it. I had been involved in the DUI court in DeKalb and the drug court. And then in Fulton, I was the backup judge for accountability for the mental health accountability court and the drug court. And I started thinking about whether or not that kind of model could work with young violent offenders.
Yeah.
So I had a number of interns. We researched and searched the country to find a program I could copy because, let's face it, why recreate the wheel if somebody else is doing it? We couldn't find one.
Wow.
So we had to start from scratch.
Right.
And over the 11 years that I presided over it, it had many iterations while we went. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of those. But essentially, if you qualified initially for the program, the district attorney's office would consider reducing the armed robbery charge to robbery.
Okay.
Robbery does not have a minimum mandatory, and it's left to the discretion of the judge. Okay. So then we could deal with the sentencing aspect. But if you got in the program, you would have to come see me every month.
Okay.
So prior to COVID, the first Friday of every month, I had a full courtroom of folks that were in the program. They had to come to see me. They had to be enrolled in school. They had a curfew. They got drug tested. They had to read every day and write handwritten book reports every month in addition to their schoolwork. They had to bring me their progress reports, their report cards. And we had a check-in every month.
Right.
And you didn't, if you did well, then we would sentence you and you stay in the program. Over time, we realized that we could put them on the defense bar. Fell in love with the program for obvious reasons.
Right.
It was giving defendants a chance that they otherwise wouldn't get. And so defense attorneys started asking me, could they get bond for their client if their client participated in the program before sentencing?
Okay.
And we realized quickly that that was a great idea because we could put somebody on bond in the program and see how they did. They do well, they get a sentence reduction and into the program permanently. If they don't get the sentence reduction and into the program. Okay. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts.
Right. Okay. And have you had a lot of success with it? Are the youth in the program really making a big difference in their lives now?
Huge.
Really?
We'll get to the downside, but yes, I have to back up again. There was no staff.
Wow.
Or funding for this program. It was me, my court staff, the public defender that loved participating, the district attorney, and probation. But these were all folks with full-time jobs doing this in addition to their full-time jobs.
Right.
So we have just recently hired a part-time director, but we don't have specific stats. I can give you a lot of anecdotal, and I can tell you what the social workers and public defenders tell me about the numbers. They say it's more successful than many of the accountability courts. Good. I can tell you that as late as today, when I was meeting with the officers that I'll tell you about in a minute, I was in touch with, on my personal cell phone, at least 6 of the participants that have been graduated for some time.
Wow.
That are all working and still in touch with me.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, and I think a big part of that is that somebody is holding them accountable and that there's an adult who wants to see them succeed and their well-being matters, right? And so, and I think that's probably the biggest disconnect that a lot of the youth offenders are having, is that they don't have an adult that is really genuinely trying to help them do well.
I think we figured out early on there were 2 major components, aside from some parenting sometimes, missing from these young folks is accountability, as you say, but also praise.
Yeah.
These kids are not expected to accomplish anything.
Wow.
But they're also not praised when they do accomplish something.
That's interesting. So I was having this thought this morning about, what is the difference? Because I'm in the process right now of writing a book, and just kind of go back a little bit. My background is criminal psychology, was what my major was in college. So I was particularly studying children who were incarcerated. And so I did my internship with the Department of Juvenile Justice. And I spent a summer doing psychosocial assessments, meeting with the parents, meeting with the kids, determining their, ability to be released on a ankle monitor. I was on suicide watch for some of them and visiting them pretty frequently, in their homes, when they were released. So I got to talk to a lot of these children, and what I have found is they lacked any sort of expectations in their life, and that the hope that things would get better was not there. And when there's no hope and there's no expectations, there's really a formula for, well, none of this matters then, right? So it's the hopelessness that you find when you're dealing with youth who just are don't have the structure that they need. So is that similar to what you have found?
It is, and I found that over the years. When I was the Solicitor General, and for people that don't know, because lawyers don't know, the Solicitor General is the sort of the district attorney of misdemeanors for counties that have a district attorney and a solicitor. Okay. So the Solicitor General is the elected official that prosecutes things like DUI, disorderly conduct, possession of marijuana less than an ounce, cases that carry a sentence of less than 12 months.
Okay.
They're also, truancy is also can be charged. And we started the first parental accountability court in DeKalb County when I was the solicitor. And what that was holding parents whose young children did not go to school responsible for them not going to school. I think when you hit the teens and high school age, that becomes more difficult.
Right.
But you would be shocked at the number of 6th grade and under students that are missing literally months of school.
Wow.
So we started looking back when we did this to September to the 1st of December. And we literally had to take children and families where the children were missing 25, 30 days of school in the first 2.5 months. And that was only a teeny percentage. The interesting thing we found by getting the parents in, I'll never forget one, the young man was never in school on time. And I asked Mom, why isn't your son in school? Well, after his alarm goes off, he goes back to sleep. Well, where are you? Well, I was asleep. And I just kind of looked.
Right.
But what we found out, and as I recall, we only put one mother in jail, and it was only for a day or so to bring home a point that when you got these families back together and got these kids in school, they did better. Part of the problem was when they fall so far behind, they don't want to go to school because they don't understand what's going on. They're not keeping up with the rest. And I think this is true throughout the criminal justice system, that we are not instilling old-time values in our young folks as they grow up. You and I, when we were in high school, we didn't think about whether we were going to go to school the next day.
Right.
That wasn't an option.
Right.
That was just what was going to happen.
Right.
That's not always true anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. So, I think about the parents, and there were so many times when I was doing the psychosocial assessments of the parents as well. And, just the lack of empathy for what their children are going through was astonishing to me. And their disregard, they detach themselves from the actions of their child. And, knowing that there's a direct correlation with what's going on at home and how the kids are, because once the child leaves their house, now they're impacted by the peer pressure at school, right? So if they're not keeping up academically, or they don't fit in because, their clothes are not clean, or, there's issues at home, it's really hard for somebody to go to school and feel like they can fit in there. And so they just don't want to go, right? They feel ostracized. So it's a huge problem. So, well, I applaud you for doing something about it, because, not enough is done at the early ages to really prepare kids to get a different way out, to find that other avenue. So tell me a little bit more about your path through the justice system. So as you get out of college, there's so many positions in here that I've mentioned in your bio. where they're elected positions. Is this just something you strived for, or you just really wanted to make a difference? And because it just seems like everything that you did there, it's really impactful.
I loved being an assistant DA.
Really?
I mean, absolutely loved it. It was trying cases was so much fun. It was a place I was comfortable. I loved the courtroom.
Yeah.
It's not a job for everybody because you have to have a different sense of humor. You're dealing, at least in the counties I worked in, DeKalb and Fulton primarily, Tallapoosa and around the state a little bit, you're dealing with the worst of the worst criminals.
Right.
So you're seeing loved ones that have been killed. You're seeing children that have been molested and abused in horrible ways. But there's a reward to that too when the little girl comes running into the courtroom to give you a hug when you've been prosecuting her case, or the victim's family comes in to love you. Did I do it for these altruistic, non-selfish reasons? Probably not.
Yeah.
It was something I was excited about doing. I loved. My third year of law school, I interned with the Fulton County DA's office.
Okay.
With an incredible prosecutor by the name of Tom Jones. And it was a great opportunity, but I'll never forget. As I said, I'm an Army brat.
Yeah.
So I didn't go home in college at Thanksgiving because Christmas break was right after. And so my parents were in Northern Virginia where my dad was stationed. So I'd go home at Christmas. Okay. I was dating a guy at the time. And so the plan that year, my third year of law school at Thanksgiving, was that I would spend the Wednesday evening through the Thanksgiving holiday with the guy I was dating and his family.
Right.
Which was very nice for me. And I was in the district attorney's office when Tom, the prosecutor, came in, and there had been a series of homicides involving the slaying of men.
Wow.
Which was a little unusual for a serial criminal. But he came in and he said, the police department, this was about noon, said the police department just called. They've got an arrest warrant. They've identified the guy they think did this. They've got an arrest warrant and a search warrant. Do you want to go? Wow. I picked up the phone and I called the guy I was dating. I said, I don't know when I'm going to be home. Don't wait for me. I'll let you know sometime later, and hung up the phone, and off we went. And never looked back. It was just fun.
Right.
And never thought about any elected position until I was, and I had a great experience. I went from DeKalb to the State Prosecuting Attorneys Council, which had a drug unit at the time, but it became more of a condemnation unit, which was more civil, and I didn't love it. So I ended up back in Fulton, had a really good time in Fulton, and ended up prosecuting I got thrown into some public corruption.
Oh, interesting.
Prosecuted a pretty large case involving police officers that had killed a man. 2 police officers killed a man, and they had robbed and burglarized a bunch of strip clubs. And I was prosecuting that case. It was back when Court TV didn't have different stations and reporters, so it was the only one, a gavel to gavel. And that kind of threw me into corruption. And I was in Fulton County for 10 years. Then I went out to Tallapoosa to be the chief assistant.
Okay.
And it was a different kind of prosecution. There's no reason to go in there. But J. Tom Morgan was then the district attorney of DeKalb County. Okay. And he, right about this time, I don't know, you may remember, the sheriff in DeKalb County had lost the election to someone else.
Yep.
And he thought, and this was Sidney Dorsey was the one who lost.
Yep.
He thought if he murdered the incoming sheriff, he'd get his job back.
Oh my God.
This happened right before the holiday, and J. Tom, the DA, came to me when I was in Tallapoosa and said, will you come back to the DeKalb DA's office? And I said, if I can work on the sheriff assassination case. And his response was, well, if you can get your job done in the courtroom during the day and you have extra time, you can.
Wow.
Not thinking I would find the extra time. So I spent my days in the courtroom and my night at the police department working on this case, which ultimately we were able to solve and convict. It was a change of venue, which most prosecutors don't get to do. I spent the summer in Albany.
Oh, wow.
Trying the case. I tell you that for this. J. Tom decided to step down at the end of this case because it had kind of been the career high.
Sure. Yeah.
And we didn't know who the new DA was going to be, the elected DA, and I didn't know if I had to have a job. The then Solicitor General we knew was going to run for the DA's position. So at lunch one day, my trial partner and my investigator were joking around, what are we going to do? Yeah. We're going to need a job.
Right.
And somebody goes, well, the solicitor's leaving. You could be the solicitor. And my trial partner goes, and I could be the chief assistant. And my investigator goes, and I could be the chief investigator. And it was a joke.
That's awesome.
It was a joke.
Right.
That quickly got legs.
Wow.
And I was fortunate enough to be appointed to that, which was the first elected position I had.
Sure.
Well, then 2.5 years later, the citizens of DeKalb County fired me.
Mm.
They did not reelect me.
Okay.
So I needed a job.
Right.
And I was asked to go to the Secretary of State's office and oversee their investigative division, which was a great opportunity. I got to work with the governor and was in the Capitol. But after a couple of years, I realized with the exception of election law, it was administrative.
Yeah.
That's how I got back to Fulton County as a judge. Because that was I never thought about applying to be a judge until about 8 months before I did it.
Wow.
Never thought about it.
Wow. Okay. Because usually if somebody goes down the route of law, there's usually an end game of either an elected position, judge, or politics, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I think, and you alluded to this in some of the questions that we discussed, but I think way too often people are wanting to jump ahead when they're happy, and I kind of don't get that.
Yeah.
I never wanted to leave a job that I loved, with the exception of being a Fulton County Superior Court judge, and there's a reason for that. But as long as I was loving what I did, I wasn't looking to go anywhere else.
Yeah. I
went to law school with folks that are, when I was an assistant DA or driving fancy cars and going to fancy restaurants, and I'd run into them and they'd be like, "You look so happy.
Yeah.
You don't look any different." I'm like, that's because I get up every day and go to work and love it.
Yes.
I'm not going to work on a Saturday because some partner in a law firm wants to see my pretty face at 7:30 in the morning. Right. If I'm working on a Saturday, I'm working because I want to do it to do my job.
Right.
And I loved it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I never thought about it.
Right.
But when I was at the Secretary of State's office, I wanted to be back in the courtroom. And candidly, I had tried just about every kind of case, corruption, death penalty. Yeah. And there wasn't really a DA's office at the time that was the right fit for me. So when there was an opening, I applied. Thanks to a lot of stars aligning and having met people over the years. And I was lucky enough to get appointed.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. So how hard is it as a judge who is elected to do your job knowing that there's constituents who may not elect you again? Like, I can't imagine what that feels like. And I've never been in a position like that, so I couldn't even speak to it. But is there a thought of how do you serve the public when sometimes the decisions you have to make might go against what they want? And, with DeKalb County and corruption and, there's a legacy there that has been troubled in the past. So what does that feel like? And again, I can't even imagine.
Well, before I became an elected, when I tried that dirty cop case in Atlanta, it was a Zone 3 case. I couldn't work in Zone 3. The police officers there, I couldn't call on them if I had a problem.
Yeah. Wow.
My investigator and I were out with a witness that we lost. Oh. People were approaching our car. We were down off what used to be Stewart Avenue is now Metropolitan Parkway.
Yeah.
And we realized we couldn't call the police because when they found out it was me, they weren't going to come.
Wow.
As I got to know the officers after that, they realized that I was really pro-law enforcement, except when they did something really bad.
Right.
And that hurts all of them.
Right.
In the elected thing, I've always said this. I truly believe this. I'm going to do what I think is right. If it helps me politically, great.
Yes.
If it doesn't, and I can temper how it hurts me, I will try. But if the choice is what helps me politically or what is right, it's going to be what is right.
Yeah.
That's my dad and my mom.
That's awesome. Well, the integrity, that's wonderful. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, because I imagine that that's something that anyone in an elected position faces, on a regular basis when you have to make decisions. Is this decision going to help my constituents, or is it the right thing to do? And sometimes you can't explain everything, can you? Because sometimes, it's the right thing, but there's no way to really properly explain it to the constituents because they almost have to be in your shoes to understand it.
You have to have a barometer sometimes. I'll never forget when I became solicitor. My very first boss, who I loved to death, came to me with a case that was a difficult one, and he wanted me to be creative in a sentence for his guy.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, on a Monday. And I said I'd get back to him.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it. And Thursday night, Friday morning, in the middle of the night, I realized that the only reason I was thinking about it was because the person I loved and respected the most was asking me. And I realized that was not the reason to do it. And I called him that morning and said, Bob, I'm sorry, I can't do this. You taught me better.
Oh, that's amazing. Good.
And told him why I had even been thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, good for you. That's hard. Yeah. I imagine it's a very hard thing to do. So as you're growing through your journey, what challenges and obstacles do you think you have faced that have been especially trying, given being a woman or just coming up through wanting to do the right thing? What has been your biggest accomplishment through that in terms of overcoming obstacles?
I hate to date myself, but I started in the legal community when it was still the boys' club. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In some ways, that could be difficult.
Sure.
In other ways, it was kind of fun. I'll never forget being the attorney assigned to the courtroom, and I'd go down there in the morning for whatever calendar. Mm-hmm. I'd be sitting at the table, and some attorney would walk up and go, "Is there going to be an assistant DA here?" And I'd be like, "I'm sure there is." Wouldn't say anything. And then when the judge came on the bench and he called me to call the calendar, I just went up and called the calendar and thought, okay. Or the people that would say, "Where do you work?" In the DA's office. Is your filing stuff interesting? Not filing something. I'm not the assistant.
Right.
Right. Now, with that said, that comes out as if there's something not great about being the assistant.
Sure.
The clerical staff run offices.
Oh, yeah.
And they deserve the bulk of the credit for everything that goes on.
Absolutely. I agree.
But it is kind of fun to deal with the men that just want to underestimate you from day one.
Yeah. Yeah. I deal with a good share of that myself in the security industry.
I am sure.
So I think it's funny though. And most of the time they don't assume that I'm the one in charge. One of the best ones is, "So is this your husband's company?" I love those comments. Not quite. Yeah. So
thankfully, my parents always told me I could do anything. And actually, I won my very first legal battle in the 6th grade.
Wow.
And it sort of rolls into what you're saying. I started a new middle school, and the policy was that boys could wear shorts to school and girls couldn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I didn't think that was fair.
Right.
And this is back in the day when you used to be able to write the TV station and they'd have a segment on called Your Opinion or Your Viewpoint. So we were in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I wrote the local Louisville TV station.
Yeah.
And they actually put me on.
Wow.
And I made my case for why it wasn't fair and it was discriminatory. Mm-hmm. And I got the policy changed.
Wow. Good for you.
Yeah, boys couldn't wear shorts to school anymore.
I love it. That's awesome. All right. Well, good for you. All right. So tell me, who inspires you?
Now?
Yeah.
Ever.
Both.
My dad and my parents.
Yeah.
My dad, Italian Catholic Army colonel.
Yeah.
Dating was quite a challenge in high school. My mom, who always supported him and supported us. I tell people that my parents gave me the tools to do the right thing. If I choose not to use them, it's on me, not them.
Yep.
Inspires me my first boss, Bob Wilson, and the guy I interned with, Tom Jones.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of women that inspire me, the ones that help women.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Unfortunately, women can be their own worst enemies, and they don't help each other. And that's a travesty when it happens.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on the show because, I find that depending on the generation, I find that some of the older generations, they have had to fight so hard to get where they are at an executive level that they're not necessarily reaching their hand down and pulling the next woman up, right? Because there's still a little bit of cutthroatness where they are. Whereas I find that in kind of more younger generations, they do tend to support each other a little bit more. But there's a cattiness and a competitiveness that I find it just sets us back so much. And women supporting women is one of the best things that I think has come, through over the past few years that I've noticed the most. So.
Well, the other group that I was going to tell you inspires me are the young men and women, but women in particular, that are working hard, that I can still help. So many people helped to get me where I am, and people say all the time, because I've had a wonderful career, why do you still stay engaged? And when I say politics, I'm not talking about Republican, Democrat politics. I'm talking about just keeping in touch with the people in the world that can help other people.
Yeah.
And my response is, because so many people help me, if I don't stay engaged, I can't help the younger women and men that are coming up.
Absolutely. Well, what you're doing with My Journey Matters is really impactful, and I think what's going to happen is you're going to inspire so many people who, hopefully will look back and help others along the way as well. So I think that's something that I'm envisioning will happen with that.
I hope. You asked about my greatest accomplishment. I think I would have to say the My Journey Matters program, hands down. I think of those participants as my kids. I call them my kids. And there was one part of that program I didn't tell you about that I wanted to. About 4.5, 5 years ago, pre-COVID, then Deputy Chief Erica Shields of the Atlanta Police Department engaged with the My Journey Matters program through Leadership Atlanta. And she became very interested, and she got a federal grant and got to assign 3 full-time police officers just to the My Journey Matters program.
Wow.
And when she became chief, she made it a permanent part of the police department. They are not the gotcha police.
Yeah.
They are there to mentor these young people, help them, make sure they get to school, they visit their families, they go to birthday parties, baby showers, all kinds of things. And it's amazing to watch the relationship between these at-risk younger folks and defendants and the affection they come to have for these officers.
That's amazing.
And if you could imagine the change in narrative across the country, if our challenged or at-risk young people had that kind of relationship with the police department.
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I love that so much. So is it still a permanent part?
It is. That was my meeting.
That's awesome.
Our yearly meeting with 4 of my officers that have been in the program today.
Wow. That's fantastic. Great.
And actually, one of my officers, because this is a female directed program.
Sure.
Loretta Griffin is an Atlanta police officer that's been with me for a long time in the program, is also an Army officer or in the reserves.
Wow.
And she might be a great person to chat with sometime.
I'd love to have her on the show. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to talk with her more about her personal experiences in the program, because I'm sure she could share so much great information.
She has funny stories, sad stories, happy stories.
Yeah, I love it. So tell me a little bit more. We talk about power on the show, right? And what it means to step into your power, what it means to give away your power. And I was talking to somebody about this the other day, because as women, we often give our power away. We give somebody else credit for something that we've done, or we have managed to, excuse our way out of anything that would involve accolades, right? Like, it's just not me. It's not for me. Or we let somebody criticize us or cut us down in a way that just doesn't feel good, but we don't say anything in the moment, and we give our power away in that instance as well. So tell me about a time that you've given your power away, and then another time that you've stepped back into your power.
I don't know about giving my power away. I probably fall sometimes into the category of not wanting the attention or the media. I think if there's a time I've given my power away or my voice away, it would have been where I didn't have a choice, because I had a supervisor or a boss that I didn't have a choice about what I was doing.
Yeah.
I will say that as having been a manager in some form or fashion for the last, 15 plus years, my belief as a manager is that you give the credit to the people that work with you and your team, and you take the blame for anything that goes wrong if you're the leader.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good leader.
Yes.
And I don't necessarily think that gives power away. I think that actually empowers the people that are working so hard. I just think if you're the one in charge, you take the blame for mistakes.
Yes.
And you give the credit to the people that do the hard work every day.
Yep. I agree. At the end of the day, if something goes wrong in that stadium and somehow it can fall on me, it's on me. I own that no matter who, directly was involved. I own it because I taught them. I set the expectations, we manage and, if something falls short, it's me. And so I agree. That's something that I think any leader should be doing, is taking the blame for anything. That should never filter down to the team. So what advice would you give to 18-year-old you?
18-year-old me.
Yes.
I thought about this one a lot. I think there's two big ones.
Okay.
One would be do what you love. Find something you love to do. Life is way too short. And if some people don't have a choice about being miserable every day because they have to get a paycheck and they have to have a job and there are no choices. But if you have a choice,
right,
and you're in a job or a profession you don't like, find something else.
Yeah.
I have been so fortunate. I'm not going to say there haven't been times in my jobs. There have been periods where I wasn't as happy. Right. But I'm not a morning person, so I'm not going to tell you I love to get up. But when I get up, I love going to my jobs. Yeah. I don't dread. And 5 o'clock comes, as Hunter, my assistant here, will tell you, that keeps me going. 5 o'clock comes way too fast for me.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the last time I looked at the clock and said, do I ever get to get out of here?
Right.
The other thing, and I think we find this out as we get a little older, but I don't think people told me this as much. The other two things would be, you never know where you're going to see somebody again.
Yeah.
And how you may interact with them. And I have so many stories about that I won't get into. But when I interviewed to be the Solicitor General,
sure,
it was a gubernatorial appointment, but I never met the governor before I got the appointment. I may have met him in passing at some event, but
sure.
I didn't interview with him. I interviewed with his legal counsel, a gentleman by the name of Harold P. Melton,
okay,
who was his counsel at the time. Harold P. Melton just stepped down as the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court and was my first chief when I took the job. And he was a young lawyer when I met him. The last thing I would say is, and I've sort of taken this on as a little bit of a mantra, Luke Bryan has a song. I like all kinds of music almost.
Sure.
I'm not sure I love bluegrass all the time, but I love most kinds of music. Luke Bryan has a song called Most People Are Good.
Yeah.
And there's two lines in there that hit home for me. One is that most mothers qualify for sainthood.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people that's true. I know my mom does.
Yeah.
But the other one is that days go slow and years go fast.
Yes.
And I don't think we realize that. And we sometimes sacrifice the time we should be spending with the people that are closest to us, in particular our family.
Yeah.
And so I hope people find other things in life besides their jobs and spend time with their families before it's too late for them to spend time with their families.
Yeah, that hits home for me this week because I have a friend who just recently passed away. And he's a great man, Army Ranger, very, very distinguished military career, 2 Purple Hearts, just an outstanding person. And I knew he was sick. And then it just so suddenly he's gone. And just one of those things where it's like, we never got to do this. We never got to talk about that. We said we were going to do this. And all of that came rushing back this week. And it's just this mountain of regret that I feel like, you don't know how long you have with people. So, chase those moments when you can.
That's to me the most important lesson of all, is to find time for the people that really matter to you.
Yeah.
We find lots of time for people that are different parts of our life that I don't want to say they don't matter.
Sure. Yeah.
But we don't always find time for the most important people in our lives.
Yeah, I agree. So how can we reach out to our youth and help them and make them understand that they have a place to go to, and not just the youth, but mental health in general, because I talk to a lot of people in the law enforcement community on this podcast, and it's an ongoing theme. And, my friend who just passed away, there were some mental health issues. And so how do we reach people.
Well, I will say the Atlanta Police Department has done a pretty good job over the last number of years. They've got it, and I don't know all of the details, but they have a mental health initiative.
Good.
Where when they encounter someone with clear mental health issues, there's a diversion to mental health services instead of arrest.
Good.
And I think that's a huge step. We need more mental health services. Part of the problem is, at least from the criminal justice perspective,
sure,
you can get folks that are mentally ill help. The problem is when they don't take their medication, that's when they get back in trouble. And unfortunately, you can only sort of excuse that so often. With My Journey Matters in particular, when I knew I had a young person with mental health issues, we would have a conversation about, look, number one, there's nothing to be embarrassed about because you have mental health challenges. We all have challenges at some point. I said, and I understand sometimes the medication doesn't make you feel good or it makes you not feel the way you want to. Don't just quit taking it. Talk to your doctor or provider. Tell them what's going on and let them adjust and tweak the medication.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of mental health, that's it. I think the media is not always our friend in messaging.
Yeah.
Messaging from the media is every night there's a shootout. Every night somebody's doing something wrong and we're all so divided. And I really don't think we're that divided.
Yeah.
Most of my friends, regardless of what their backgrounds are, regardless of what their political views, we believe in most of the same things when you sit down and actually talk about it. And the media would have you believe we all hate each other.
Right. Of course. Right.
And I just don't think that's true. And I think that's what we need to convey to some of our young people, that and the fact that guns are not the answer.
Yeah, I agree. It's tough though, because I look at like our foster care system, for example, and I think to myself, are they getting the help that they need? Are they getting the resources that they need? You know, when they're being bounced around from house to house and there's limited social workers to be able to see them and limited time. And, you know, these are children who are dealing with trauma, real trauma. And without the help that they need, I think I read a statistic, something like 80% of all foster children will end up in our criminal justice system at some point. And it's scary. And, you know, I really want to figure out a way to help that particular segment of our population, because I think that's what I was dealing with mostly when I was, you know, in the juvenile detention center in my internship.
There's a huge initiative statewide to help with the foster care system.
Is there?
There have been a lot of resources put into it, and a lot in the more rural areas where the support may not be there like you have. Sure. You know, you obviously have a lot more financial support and resources when you're in a large metro area. It's one of the reasons it took so long to get accountability courts around the state. Really? Metro areas, we had them. People believed in them. But if there's nowhere for treatment that's less than an hour away, it's hard to mandate treatment because you've got somebody that's trying to take care of their family. They don't have the resources to get an hour away 2 or 3 times a week for treatment. So, but that piece has gotten better, and there's been an emphasis, and our current Chief Justice has been very engaged in the resources going into foster care.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, because that's one thing that I would, you know, if I could make an impact somewhere, it's there. Because I think if we want to turn around our criminal justice system, we have to start there. We have to start with our youth who are, you know, dealing with traumatic circumstances, whether it's losing a parent or drug addiction or abuse in the home or whatever the situation is that had them removed in the first place. We need to deal with their mental health and, you know, get them on the right resources and on the right path. And I think that will hopefully alleviate some of what's going on in our criminal justice system, because just, you know, youth dealing with everything that they're dealing with. Like even when, you know, bringing it down to as simple as divorce, and not that divorce is simple, but when you have children who go through a divorce at you know, between, let's just say, the ages of 10 to 16, those are the ones that I feel deal with it the most traumatically there, because they're experiencing hormonal shifts and, you know, coming up with their own way of viewing the world. And so when there's a divorce or something that happens, I find that those are the ones who take it the hardest. And so if we can just get children the help that they need and stop assuming that children are resilient and they're going to figure it out, you know, their brains aren't wired to figure it out. That's what we're here for. So
no, I think you're right.
Well, what do you wish more people knew?
How lucky we are to be in this country.
Yes.
Having traveled around the world, we are an imperfect society. We're an imperfect government. But I've had the opportunity to travel around the world. I went to high school in Germany. When I was 12, I got to spend 6 weeks in Caracas because one of my little girlfriend's father was an exchange student with the military. Yeah. And I'll never forget seeing the cardboard houses on the mountain that people lived in. We tear down our country a lot and sometimes forget that while it may not be perfect, it's still the best one in the world. Mm-hmm. We have the right to gripe about our government openly without repercussion. Mm-hmm. We have the right to have our disputes, criminal or civil, decided by a jury of citizens, not by a kangaroo court or a dictator.
Right.
We have the right to vote.
Yeah.
I just, maybe it's because I grew up in a military family. I love this country. Mm-hmm. I get frustrated with it at times, just like everyone else, but I'm not sure I'd want to live where some people have to live.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've done a bit of traveling too, and I did some volunteer work in South America.
Wow.
And just, if we think, we've got challenges. Yeah, some of the kids I went to, I volunteered at a place to teach English at a school in Bogota, Colombia. And there's a town called Soacha. And Soacha is a very, very impoverished area. And same thing, little shacks that people are living in. There's no air conditioning, there's no running water, there's nothing. And they still go to school and they still, show up and play. And, you do your best to give them as much support and guidance as you can.
I think sometimes we just take for granted the things we have.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with you. Well, thank you so much, Shawn. This has been a delightful conversation. I have really enjoyed it. It's been so insightful, and I've so been looking forward to talking with you. So.
Well, thank you so much. It's been fun to talk with you, and as you can tell, I can talk about My Journey Matters forever.
And I could too. I think what you're doing is extraordinary, and I wish you all the best. And if there's anything I can do at all to help, I would absolutely love to.
Well, thank you so much. And Happy New Year.
Thank you.
And
Happy
go dogs.
New Year. Go dogs. So thank you so much for joining us on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. You can find more information on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe, and you can learn more about Shawn LaGrua and her My Journey Matters program on the website as well. So thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time, and until then, step into your own power.